These editing tips are going to be universal and can be applied to client work, branded content, YouTube videos, and everything in between. And this video is sponsored by Storyblocks, but more on them later, so let's just jump right in. So my first tip is to make selects using your timeline. And what I mean by this is dumping all your footage into a timeline, watching everything back, and then I'll drag things up onto the secondary video track in order to indicate to myself, these are the clips that are usable. You should always do this on a timeline opposed to using your media pool and trying to create in and out points, because this is what's gonna make you get really familiar with your footage and just know where everything is, opposed to trying to set in and out points in your media pool, and it's just very disorganized to do it that way. That's usually the first thing I do when I start an edit. So once I've created my selects, which are on my second video track, I paste them into a new timeline. And if you're working on a massive project with tons of selects, it's gonna be super annoying to close all these gaps individually and start editing from there. So what I like doing is go up to keyboard customization, and I'm sure there's something like this for Premiere as well. There's a feature called delete gaps, and I set a keyboard shortcut for that. It's Command Shift Delete, hit save. And now if you have tons of selects, what you can do is select one gap, hit delete, and it closes all the gaps for you. So now I have a timeline with all usable footage, and it's just gonna make the process of editing so much easier because I'm only working with stuff that is actually usable. Depending on your project size, you can cut this down into further selects and just create more timelines for different scenes, and even going the extra mile to color code things I've seen people do. This obviously depends on your project size, and I just feel like by doing the organization stuff up front, that's just gonna help you so much in the long run when you're actually editing. Tip number 2 is to not use wallpaper music. And what I mean by this is even this tutorial that you're watching of me right now, I had changed the music up in order to hop into a different segment of the video, and the same thing should apply for your branded content, your documentaries, or whatever else you're editing. I actually learned this tip back in film school in my documentary class when my teacher, Jeanette Lokman, called me out for using wallpaper music, and I didn't know what she meant, but what she meant was I was relying too heavily on one song to just drive my whole edit. Things need to be broken up, and when things feel stagnant, it's always good to change up the music and change up the vibe of your edit. Let something else drive it. It could be an interview, some B-roll, a soundbite, a sound effect. And a good example of this was in the Depop video. I had the same song for about 30 seconds, and it felt too jarring to just have the full track playing out. So what I did was I found a headphone sound effect and let that play on one part of the video, and it just felt like it broke things up a little bit and didn't feel so stagnant. Whatever your edit is, even if it's like a small 15-second thing, I think by using this tip, it's just gonna help your audience feel more engaged throughout the whole piece. Tip number 3 is to use breaks. And speaking of which, I'm gonna take a break right now. See it so often where I'll be watching a video and the audience isn't given time to digest the information or the visuals they were just given on the screen. When I'm creating these videos, I make a very conscious effort to give you guys a break by cutting to B-roll and increasing the music to digest what I just said. There's a few different ways to use breaks, and the most obvious one is to cut to B-roll of what the person is talking about on your A-roll. And a great way of doing this is by using Storyblocks. I usually like to use these light leak transitions in order to cut to B-roll in my videos. And if you don't have B-roll for what you're referring to in your videos, Storyblocks has a ton of options to choose from since they're constantly updating their library with footage, templates, music, images, and more. They also offer unlimited downloads for your subscription costs opposed to paying for individual clips like some websites, which just makes things a whole lot easier. To get started with unlimited stock media downloads at one set price, head to storyblocks.com/mattatia or click the link in the description. By watching some videos on this channel, you can see I sort of break things up into segments, which leads me to my next point: end your songs with reverb. A lot of the time, if you try to just fade out a song, it doesn't really sound right. So the way I tackle this is by adding reverb, and I'm gonna show you how to do that quickly. So if we just try to fade out the song, it doesn't sound right and it doesn't sound conclusive. So let's just say I want the video to end right here. So a hard cut doesn't sound just right, but it does sound like the song could potentially end here. So I'm gonna cut the song at this point right here. And what I'm gonna do is hold Control and drag it down, which I'm gonna duplicate it, right click, hit new compound clip, and then open in timeline, and then I'm gonna duplicate it again, drag it out, and hit mute. Go back to the timeline, drag your clip out. So in the effects panel under audio effects, type in reverb and drag it onto this clip. And what we're gonna do is play with the room size. I usually make it between 90 and 80. Play with the reverb time and the output. So you can see the video sounds like it just comes to an end there. You can finesse it a little bit more, but I think this just sounds way better than trying to fade out a song. Moving on to tip number 5, hold your shots for at least 10 seconds. I know this is more of a shooting tip, but I was told this a while back by an editor, and he told me whenever I'm shooting B-roll or anything like that, always hold your shots long enough so you have enough to work with it in post. I posted this tip a while back on TikTok, and apparently not a lot of people knew about this, but when you're shooting, hold it for 10 seconds, because if you're just holding for these like 2-second clips, your editor won't be able to work with that, especially if you're editing it yourself. You're just gonna screw yourself over. What I do is I count in my head up to 10, and then I hit cut from there. It's always better to have more of a clip than not enough of it. I'm actually working with an editor on a new project I'm working on, and we were reviewing footage the other day, and he thanked me for doing this because apparently not a lot of people know about holding your shots for 10 seconds. Tip number 6 is to just take a step back. This is another obvious one, but sometimes the best thing you could do is just by taking a step back from your work and viewing it with fresh eyes. And I even like doing this by doing an export, viewing it on my phone in different rooms and different places, going outside and watching it. And you'll just see things in a totally different light, and you'll be able to problem solve your projects a whole lot easier. So if you took anything away from this video, check out this one I have queued up. Thank you for watching, and subscribe to my channel.